Welcome to Spill the Tea with Josephine. Today, we're talking to New York Times bestselling author, Alina Adams. So I'd like to welcome everybody to Spill the Tea with Josephine and today's guest, Alina. And she's going to tell us a little bit more about herself and the wonderful mysteries that she writes.
Thank you so much for having me. So I'm excited to be here because March is always a big month for those of us who are figure skating fans, because this year, 2024, the World Figure Skating Championships will start on March 18th. And in an incredible coincidence, I have a figure skating murder mystery series. Now, this series was originally published by Berkeley Prime Crime as paperback originals. But then a couple of years ago, I got the rights back to the books. You hear that, Amazon? I have all the rights back to the books. And I published them myself as ebooks, but they aren't just ordinary ebooks, they are enhanced ebooks. What that means is, in addition to all of the text that appeared in the traditionally published Prime Crime, Berkeley Prime Crime paperback originals, I partnered with the Ice Theater of New York, which is a group here in Manhattan that skates at Chelsea Piers. And they gave me access to their video library, which means that in addition to just the text, I also have videos, professional skating videos, professional skaters shot professionally as part of the story. Because the thing about skating is, yes, you can read about it, and I use the pretty words, but really figure skating is something that needs to be watched. And as a result, my books don't just have words, they have video of skaters.
Oh, that's neat. So that's something that you won't see with other books in the area. So it's
Well, it's
definitely
something
something
I'm
unique.
trying. It's definitely unique, and it's something that I'm trying. And luckily, I spoke to a fellow author, and she said, I've priced out these IT guys, and they're so expensive. And I said, oh, see, here's the thing. I sleep with my IT guy. But it's okay. We're married. So it is a technical challenge. And if I didn't have my husband, I probably wouldn't have been able to do this on my own. But he was able to figure out how to do the technical aspect of it. So you're reading the book, and it's just like a regular ebook. And you're reading the book, and then you come to a moment where we talk about somebody's performance. And what do you know? There's a photo there and a link, and you click the link, and you can actually watch the
Oh,
performance.
that's cool. That's really neat. Because I was just going through your book sample on Amazon, and I was just enjoying like the way you were describing things. And, you know, I grew up watching some figure skating, and we did a whole unit in school on the Olympics. And I just thought
Wow.
you can just visualize it in your head right there. But even, that you don't have to really do because the links are right there in your book. So that's really awesome to be able to go and see what you're reading.
And the other added benefit is that for many years, I actually worked for ABC Sports in their figure skating department. So a lot of the stories are very much the kind of behind the scenes
Mhm.
things that I couldn't put into nonfiction. It's actually very funny. I've done a couple of nonfiction books on figure skating. There was one called Inside Figure Skating, and I did a biography of Sarah Hughes, which was awesome because I wrote it and it was published in December of 2021, and then she very sweetly won the Olympics for me in 2022. So that was really great for book sales. I see her mother at some events because her mother is very active in a lot of youth sports organizations, and I always thank Sarah for being such a considerate girl to win the Olympics to help my book sales. So I had done some nonfiction titles, and
Mhm.
people always said to me, when are you going to write your real tell-all, the one about what really goes on behind the scenes of various figure skating competitions? And my response was, when I no longer want to work in skating and when I want to piss off a lot of my friends. So while I haven't worked in skating for a while, because one of the things about working for sports is you're flying all around the world. And, I did the Nagano Olympics in 1998. I worked the
Mhm.
World Championships in Switzerland. I worked the European Championships in Paris. I worked the National Championships in Nashville. So you're constantly traveling. But then,
Yeah.
you have kids, and that really cuts into your travel time. So while I don't work in that aspect of coverage anymore, I still have lots of friends, and I don't want to really piss people off. So I fictionalized a lot of things. And it's very funny because people will say, well, is this character supposed to be that person? I'm like, I don't know, could be, maybe. But so it's fun for people who really know the sort of the inside baseball, and it's fun for people who don't realize what really goes on behind the scenes. And you know how it says at the beginning of every book, you know, no character in this book is based on anyone living or dead.
Mm-hmm.
Really, that's my story, and I'm sticking with it. But other than that, it's fun for both the really, really intense figure skating fan who follow their not just the sports action, but the personal lives very, very
Mm-hmm.
closely, and for people who have no idea, and also for people who just like cozy mysteries because it follows that format too. So it's like I wrote 5 separate books and they're all available individually, but I also have a compendium, which is the figure skating mystery series, 5 books in 1. And just like it's 5 books in 1, it's all the fun stuff in one. It's the serious sports stuff and the gossipy stuff, and you don't even need to know anything about skating. It's just fun stuff. So I try to shove as much as I can into one book, kind of like I'm trying to shove as much as I can into this interview right now.
So how did you become interested in doing your fiction as a cozy mystery as opposed to, say, like a romance or something like that?
Well, here's the thing. First of all, I did write several romances. I
Oh,
have
okay.
4 romances out. I have 2 Regency romances, one called The Fictitious Marquis and the other one called Thieves at Heart. And I have 2 contemporary romances, one called Annie's Wild Ride and another one called When a Man Loves a Woman. But as my husband explains, after I met him, I could no longer write romance novels because I knew what real romance was like. So
Oh.
I could no longer fictionalize it. That's his theory. So I moved on to killing. And basically, the story of how these mysteries came about is actually pretty interesting. So I had done the Sarah Hughes book, which
Mhm.
did really, really well because, as I said, she was kind enough to win the Olympics. And the editor I was working with at the time said to me, you know, I'd really love to do a figure skating mystery series because she had a lot of cozies that she
Mhm.
was doing, and she was a huge figure skating fan. So she thought this would be good. So I wrote a proposal that took place in Russia because Russia is such a major play in figure
Yeah.
skating. And she said to me, you know, cozy readers like things that take place in America. So try again. So then I wrote a story that did take place in America, and she was reading it and she was good with it. But then we were both watching the Olympics in 2022 when they had, sorry, not 2022, 2002. Oh my God, that was 20 years ago, 22 years ago. I can't deal, but it was 2002 in Salt Lake City.
Yeah.
And that's where they had the big judging scandal about
Mhm.
the pairs event with the Russian pairs and the Canadian pairs. And did the judges make a deal to put the French team in 3rd place in ice dance? So that was the whole big thing. Everyone was talking about it. So after 2 very detailed proposals, which as a writer, you know, you have to do multiple chapters and you have to do a detailed outline. So after 2 very detailed proposals, I'm watching the pairs event, and literally it was a weekend night, I think. And I emailed the editor one line. The judge who gives the gold to the Russian over the American is murdered. And she emailed me back within 10 minutes, yes, in capital letters. So after all the going back and forth about, you know, trying to find just the right one, what
Yeah.
actually ended up selling it was one line based on what was happening. And so that became the first book, Murder on Ice. The second book, On Thin Ice, was the proposal that I pitched that took place in America.
Mhm.
And the third book, Axle of Evil, was what had been my first proposal because it takes place in Russia. So all the books
Yeah.
were eventually accepted. But the funny part is that after all that work and all that thinking, what actually sold the series was a one-line pitch.
So tell us more about your main character of the book
The
series.
main character of the book, now here is an incredible coincidence. So when I worked at ABC Sports, I was a researcher. And
Hmm.
for those who don't know what a researcher does many, many things. One of the first thing the researcher does is compile all the background information on the competitors. Because while you're watching the coverage and the announcer, for instance, in this case, Terry Gannon, who, by the way, is a lovely, lovely, lovely person. He didn't know much about skating when he came in, but he was so determined to learn and so open. And considering that he comes from basketball and, you know, the real men's sports, so open-minded to figure figure skating and so admiring of what the athletes do. So that's my Terry Gannon is a wonderful person moment. But what the researcher does is we back in the day, in the past, we had thick binders. Now it's probably all electronic that the announcers would have in front of them. So when they say, this is her third competition in Turkey, and she's wearing a pink skate to symbolize her support for breast cancer because her mother is ill, that information is compiled by the researchers. What the researchers do is not only do we go through press coverage, but also once we're on site, we talk to the skaters and we get the stories out of them, because ABC Sports, remember, kind of invented with Wide World of Sports the idea of telling stories not about the sport, but about the athletes. Because what they realized with Wide World of Sports is they were covering sports people didn't particularly care about. They were covering log rolling and all sorts of things, but the story isn't the sport, the story is the athlete. So what the researchers do is often, even before we get to a competition, we call the skaters, we call the coaches, we ask them what's going on, and we put together what's actually called a storyline. And when there are production meetings to cover a skating event, we don't just talk about, who's doing a triple axel, but we're talking about what's the storyline here. Is she trying to be the first woman to land this jump? And we had, a skater who her mom was killed in a car accident a few weeks before the competition. We had a story out of Canada at the time where one of the skaters, she actually had a baby when she was a teenager and was now coming back to skating. We were telling stories. So what the researcher does is the researcher compiles these stories. They also compile the stats. So you get fun things. This is the third Bulgarian skater to ever compete in the pairs competition. All of that is done by the researchers. A lot of it is done in advance. Some of it is done on site, because you suddenly see that a storyline is developing, like somebody gets hurt in practice or you overhear something. And so all of that is put together by the researcher. In the figure skating murder mystery series, my heroine, Bex Levy, is shockingly a researcher. I know. Who saw that one coming? But in addition to putting together all that research, she becomes the de facto person who knows enough, who can become the amateur sleuth. She also has a producer who says to her, well, you're the researcher, right? So it's your job to solve this mystery. And I want you to solve it in time for our live broadcast, because that's really going to get our ratings up. Now, has a producer ever said that specific thing to me? No. But considering the kind of things that they demand you produce, like they want you to find out information that the skater themselves doesn't know, and you better have it in time for the live broadcast because we've already teased that we're going to have it. So it's sort of that kind of background that pushes her into the forefront of being the amateur sleuth. Because in a cozy, you always have to find a reason for the person who is not a cop, who is not a detective, but who is just somehow peripherally or directly connected with the case. What's their motivation for solving the crime, and how do they go about solving it, which for a researcher is very natural, because you're going around and speaking to the coaches and the skaters and their parents and the officials and the judges anyway, so you might as well solve a murder while you're at it.
She's collecting all the clues anyhow.
Exactly. She already has the binders. She might as well just connect the dots. Exactly. So it was just such a natural job. And the fact that I happen to do it and I happen to know how it works, that's just a coincidence, as so many things in books are.
So what's your favorite part about writing your cozy mysteries?
Well, here's the thing. First of all, I'm just addicted to writing in general. I really do think I have a physical addiction, because sometimes when I don't write for a while, because remember, those kids and they get in the way and you have to live life, and I get back on the keyboard and I touch the keys, I really do think I get an adrenaline hit. So I actually do think I have a feedback loop now, or not adrenaline, endorphins. Whatever it is, not a doctor, a writer, whatever it is, I get hit in the brain that I love doing it. I am physically addicted to it. But the thing, here's what turned out to be really interesting. So I wrote most of these murder mysteries in the early 2000s, because I had done the bulk of my traveling in the late 1990s into the early 2000s. Then I had my first child, and I traveled a little bit when I only had one. I have a very supportive husband who was sort of able to pick up the slack at home. But I did most of my writing starting in 2002 through about 2005. Yeah, the books came out. It was Murder on Ice, On Thin Ice, Axel of Evil, Death Drop, and Skate Crime. They pretty much came one after after each other, like every year or so between 2005 and 2007 or 2008 or so. And so I had written them while I was still in the heat of doing the work and remembering the stuff that we did. And then when I was editing them for the re-release as the enhanced ebooks with the videos, I read them again for the first time in maybe 15 years. And what was really great is there were things in there that I'd forgotten, just like funny things. Like at one point we were at a competition and you hire a lot of local people to help out because you don't bring everybody over from the United States. And one of the things we do is you just put up on the walls, you have, women's results, men results, dance results, and pairs results. And one of the locals had written pairs as PEARS. English isn't their first language. So people sort of ran with it. And then they put up sign that said peaches results and watermelon results and mango results. And I had totally forgotten that. And so reading these books, it's like going back into my own past. I ended up writing a diary. I'm not a journaler. I don't keep diaries. I write for money. I don't write for myself. So these became sort of my de facto journals. And then when I gave it to my daughter, my youngest daughter, she just turned 17. And these are cozy mysteries. So they're perfectly appropriate for kids like 11 and up. So she read them when she was younger. And she was like, oh, so this is your life. And I'm like, yes, it is my life. And I had forgotten it. And I am so glad that I wrote it down and fictionalized, because otherwise I would have no memory of some of these things.
So what do you plan on, like, what project are you working on now?
Well, I have done many shifts in my life, which many people have actually told me is wrong. Because, you're supposed to just write one thing and you're supposed to stick with it. So I started with Regency romances. And then I am proud to say that I killed the Avon Regency line. My second Regency, Thieves at Heart, was literally the last one they published. I want to say it was December of 1995. So I killed that line. Then I moved over into contemporaries and I did Annie's Wild Ride and I did When a Man Loves a Woman, and then the editor quit the business. So I did that too. Then I moved into the figure skating mysteries, which I did for a while. And I'm happy to say that right around the time that I wrote the figure skating mysteries, I pretty much killed off figure skating on television. Because I don't know if you remember in the late 90s, early 2000s, there were so many specials and they broadcast everything. And now you can barely even find it. I think they only do a couple of hours of nationals, Olympics, obviously, but not the world. So I killed figure skating. Then I moved into soap operas and I worked for As the World Turns and Guiding Light. And I wrote 3 books for them, Oakdale Confidential, The Man from Oakdale, and Jonathan's Stories, 2 of which were New York Times bestsellers. And then the soaps got canceled. So I killed off the soap opera genre. Oh, then I worked for All My Children and One Life to Live, and they got canceled. So I fear for your podcast, even though it's your very first one. This could be it. This could be the beginning and the end, because I killed off soaps. And so then I moved on to historical fiction. And my last 2 books I wrote a book called The Nesting Dolls, which takes place in the Soviet Union in the 1930s, the Soviet Union of the 1970s, and in present-day Brighton Beach, Brooklyn, which has a very heavily Russian Jewish community. And then my most recent book, which came out in November of 2022, was called My Mother's Secret, a novel of the Jewish Autonomous Region, which talked about the fact that the very first independent Jewish state of the 20th century is not the one most people think of. It was actually established in the 1930s on the border between Russia and China. And created by that great friend of the Jews, Joseph Stalin, a piece of information that people don't know. So my last 2 books were historical fictions that took place in Russia, Ukraine, and covered Jews. And we all know how those parts of the world are doing so well today. So not to make light of it, but you should be afraid. You should be afraid for your podcast, because my record is not great.
Well, hopefully this will, maybe we can turn things around here.
We can. I'm really hoping this will be the moment where I stop being the kiss of death to all sorts of things and turn it around. And I would love if you could do that, because, spilling the tea, I love the title. And I think it's a really great idea. And I sincerely hope I don't ruin it for you.
I'm sure you won't. I have a few more lined up, so hopefully everything goes well. And, it's always fun to pick other authors' brains and see why they chose to get into what they're doing and talk about the projects and stuff like that. So I'm excited to have had you on. And hopefully you can. Do you have a new upcoming project at the moment, or are you
I
just
do.
working
I
on?
actually have a book that hopefully will be out in May of
Mhm.
2025. It's called Go On Pretending. And it
Oh,
actually is set, oh, here we go, just
I
based on
like that
everything that
title.
I
Go on
told you.
pretending.
It's on everything I told you. It's set in the 1950s in the world of soap operas when radio soaps were transitioning from radio to television.
Yeah.
Then it's set in the Soviet Union during the Khrushchev years when there was sort of an opening up and the country wasn't as closed and repressed as it had been. Then it goes all the way through to the collapse of the Soviet Union. And eventually we end up on various libertarian communes and in Middle Eastern women's communes and all sorts of other historical things. My publisher is called History Through Fiction. And one of the
Okay.
things that really focus on is telling stories about aspects of history that people might not know about.
That's
So
cool.
that's something that I'm focusing on. And yes, the book is called Go On Pretending, and hopefully it should be out in May of 2025.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you for coming on. And we're going to put the links to all your social media and to your lovely figure skating series in our description so that everybody can find them and go download your books and enjoy a wonderful, cozy read.
Well, thank you so much for having me, and I hope I don't ruin anything.
All right. Thanks, Elena.